Yep.
Hi, this is Alan. I like Ironworx because it's where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came.
I love Ironworx with Josh, Walt and Zach. It's like sitting in your front room having a cosy chat with your best friends.
Hi, it's Diva here, and I just want you to know that Ironworx with Josh, Walt and Zach, it's definitely my favourite dose of reality. Come join the family and keep it flat.
Why sleep in when you could get your dose of iron in the morning? Listen to the Ironworx on TFR.
This is Enlightened Dawn. Roses are red, violets are blue. Iron Rail Media is the best on the plane. To this show, I will forever be true. You guys are truly the best, and I love you guys. I'm so thankful to have you in my life.
Do you like listening to space letters from Never a Straight Answer? Then tune in to The Ironworx with Zach, Walter, and Josh. Break clear of the fear on the Ironworx and become an Iron Scout.
Good morning, TFR.
Good morning.
It's Friday, my dudes.
It is Friday, my dudes. TGIF. Welcome to the Ironworx right here on Truth Frequency Radio. My name is Josh Corey, and I am joined this morning by two of my very good friends and co-hosts. Well, actually, we have several people joining us, but let's start off with my good friends and co-hosts, starting with Mr. Walter Johnson, back in the home studio there in Louisiana. Walt, how are you doing, sir?
Hello, Josh. Hello, Zach. Hello, TFR. It is good to be home, without a doubt. I was actually home on Tuesday, but between the crazy early flight and the trip and just all the trying to get back into the swing of things and, the whole lag, etc., just did not make it for Tuesday. But certainly excited for this morning show. Glad to be here. Glad that you guys have joined us for sure. So I'll shut up and let you say hey to Zach.
All righty. Well, Zach, I know, was feeling a little bit under the weather. He was sleeping in a bit this morning. So, Zach, aside from feeling a little bit ill, how are you doing?
Not too bad, Josh. How we doing? Hey, Walt. Hey, everybody out there in TFR land. It's been an interesting couple of days. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I had trouble falling to sleep. My stomach was turning and a lot of excitement, getting ready to move. Yeah, they're hoping next week it sells.
Wow.
Yeah, they're real. But it's been an interesting couple of days. I was welding and putting stuff back together after that windstorm, and I went to go turn my welder on and didn't work. So I took the welder apart, of course. That's what I do. And started tinkering and playing and started messing around with the power switch, and it like jolted on for a second. So I was like, okay, maybe it's a switch. So I took the switch out and I thought, hey, I'll test the switch. I went and asked Bob how to test it. Thought I comprehended what he said. Thought I had a bad switch. Went and got a new switch. Tested that switch before I put it in, and I got the same exact reading. Put the switch in, and the switch worked. So, yeah, I'll take it. I didn't learn anything, but it was a $8 fix for my welder. Got the job done. Yeah.
Well, whatever works.
Yeah, I'll take it. I didn't really learn a whole lot, but the welder works again.
Well, good. My week has been quiet and uneventful. Nothing new to report, per se. Still trying to not destroy a relationship with my mother now that she's living with us. So, I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But we have some excellent guests joining us this morning, because this time slot for us, because it's 4 a.m., 3 a.m. for us here, depending on exactly which time zone we're in. So it's kind of hard to get guests. So we were absolutely thrilled when John Savage managed to finagle these guests that we have joining us this morning. So let's just jump right in and say hello to Dawn Lester and David Parker, authors of What Really Makes You Ill. David and Dawn, thank you so much for joining us here on the Ironworx and Truth Frequency Radio, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be with you guys. And so I think we're going to be in for a very interesting conversation.
I think so too. I'm really looking forward to it. So I doubt there's very many people listening that have not heard of your work. But just in case, just for those of who are new to any of this, why don't you just let everybody know a little bit about what your book is about?
Yeah, sure. That's not a problem. The title, as you already gave out part of it, it's called What Really Makes You Ill, Why Everything You Thought You Knew About Disease is Wrong. So quite a challenging title. The book took us about 10 years to put together, the research, because it's almost 800 pages with 40 pages of references and citations from the scientific work that we drew our research from. So quite a long project, really. But really, it sort of blows a hole in the whole medical system, the allopathic system that we've all been familiar with for all our lives, I guess. That's not what we set out to do. We just from certain things that had happened in our personal lives with our interactions with the medical establishment, official medical establishment, things that became increasingly dissatisfied with, particularly with friends and relatives that died as a result of cancers. So there was various wake-up calls, but Dawn and I have known one another for many years, and we'd already written a couple of little books under a pen name, NOR, one of which was about the nature of reality, so a very different subject. And it was whilst we were writing that there was one of the chapters in it was about viruses. Now, up until that point, we thought the same that everyone else thought about viruses, these tiny microorganisms that basically cause all sorts of diseases, if we believe the medical establishment. So we had to do some research on them for this particular book on the nature of reality. And as we started looking, we realized that there were some big problems because we couldn't find any evidence to show that viruses actually were pathogens, which was a great shock to us, as you can imagine. And the first disease, that so-called disease that we looked at, was the HIV/AIDS story. And it didn't take too much research to realize that there was one big controversy as to quite whether a virus had actually been isolated and fully categorized. And there seemed, the more we looked into it, lots of shenanigans that had been going on in the background as to quite what had happened. But to go a very long story short, because we had to spend a lot of time on that, did a lot of research, talked to a lot of people around the world, made all sorts of visits to people, talked to doctors, many doctors who knew there was a problem but didn't want to go public about it. We came across this a lot. It's good that a few more doctors are now starting to go public and realizing, the seriousness of the times. But at that time, no one wanted to go public. But they were supporting us and giving us information. And we were able to find that, again, cutting a very long story short, there was no evidence at all for a virus being responsible for AIDS. And we found a lot of reasons as to what was actually causing this syndrome, all of which is detailed in the book. So that was our sort of first delve into it. So we thought, well, okay, if the medical establishment and officialdom can be so wrong about this particular illness, what else are they wrong about? Is there anything? So that's really what started us on this 10-year journey of research to find out quite what really makes you ill. And that's why we asked that basic question, because we could ask that, whereas doctors can't, not if they want to keep their job anyway. And some have lost their jobs because they start to ask that question. So we left no stone unturned. We accepted no answers from anyone unless it could be proved. We started out by saying, look, we'll follow the evidence. If there's no evidence to support what's being said by the authorities, then we won't believe it. And so we could ask all the questions that doctors can't ask. And having talked to doctors about their education, medical education, we soon realised why. Their training is actually less than the amount of time that we've spent. They sort of get their training within 5 years, their basic qualifications. Well, we spent 10 years. So we've looked into more things than they have done. And talking to doctors, they were able to tell us, well, yeah, in medical school, we just get told that, well, this disease is caused by that bacteria, or that disease is caused by this virus, and this is what you prescribe. It's as basic as that. But as they admit, they were never given the supportive evidence to say, well, how do you know that bacteria causes that, or how do you know that virus causes that? They never got that information, and they were not allowed to ask it either, and still aren't, as I say, not publicly anyway. But we could ask those questions, and we found the more we looked, the deeper the rabbit hole went, and that there was absolutely no true scientific support for the germ theory, which is what the whole medical establishment is based on, whether it's bacteria causing diseases or viruses causing diseases. And that's quite an astounding thing. We've got used to the idea now because we've spent so long looking at it. But it was quite astounding to realise that there was no scientific foundation for the whole medical allopathic system. So obviously what we wanted to find out, well, if germs, so to speak, and we're talking about bacteria, viruses and fungi, if none of these things cause the diseases that's attributed to them, what actually does cause the diseases? Because patently people get ill and people die from some of these so-called illnesses. And we looked at a whole range of illnesses, all the main ones to start with, and we found much more plausible reasons as to what was actually making people ill. And none of them were anything to do with germs. And this wasn't just our opinion, this is what we found as the scientific truth of the matter. We also found some interesting things as regards a thing called hydrogenesis, which is a rather fancy term for saying sort of death by modern medicine, really. And we found that in whichever country allopathic medicine is practiced, that there's huge numbers of people that die from the mainstream medical practices, and it comes under the name of hydrogenesis. And we're not talking about malpractice here. We're talking about where people are prescribed drugs by their doctors and that they take them in the prescribed way and they die. And in the States alone, in America alone, it's something like 150,000 people a year die from hydrogenesis, i.e. medical death by modern medicine. We'll call it what it is. And of course, wherever allopathic medicine is practiced, and this is the whole of the Western world really, it's the same thing. Obviously varies depending on the population numbers, but these are huge numbers of people. And you think, well, this is a tremendous scandal that you never hear about unless you dig. And of course, the picture grew wider and wider for us because we realised, well, why don't we know these things? Why aren't we hearing about these things? So we soon started to realise that the mainstream media is part of the problem. And we're seeing that today with this coronavirus nonsense. We're seeing just how much of a part the mainstream media play in perpetuating these myths, and how much they play in, or downright lies, really. No, we're not saying that each of the talking heads that you see on the television know that they're telling lies, or that there's no scientific basis for what they say, because they don't investigate. They just read from a script and put out the information. And as I'm sure all you guys know, the media worldwide is owned by quite a small number of people that own all of it. And it's very easy then for them to dictate what the media puts out. And we know that they would not have been able to perpetrate this nonsense on the world that we're living under at the moment without the mainstream media pumping out this nonsense every day. You know, you can't, I'm sure it's the same in the States as it is here in the UK. You can't turn on a television program, and certainly not the news, and I say that in inverted commas because it's certainly not that. It's just propaganda, and it beggars belief, the nonsense that they put out when you've taken the trouble to look into it. And the other thing that also beggars belief for us is the way that the general public, in the main part, have been suckered in by this. We see all sorts of crazy things, you know, even with this mask thing that people have been wearing and still wear. And even when, certainly in the UK, the government's own scientists have actually admitted that the face masks don't do any good. How could they? Even if a virus existed, you know, they're much smaller than the micromesh in a mask. You know, they're measured in nanometers. You know, it's 1,000 times smaller than a micrometer. You know, so even if viruses existed, they'd go straight through the mask anyway. So those were complete nonsense, even by their own standards. But, you know, there are real health dangers from restricting your oxygen intake and basically breathing in your own exhaust, you know.
Absolutely. What's frustrating, my sister is she was a respiratory therapist for, I guess, 15, 20 years. And if anyone should know the effects of breathing in your own CO2 extensively, she should. But unfortunately, the whole time I was there at home, we argued over and over and over about why masks would be needed, what efficiency. Isn't this just the opposite of why they're used in the hospital? I mean, it's just, it's crazy that someone who claims to be educated has let their mind be so wrapped up in this media-driven frenzy. It's very frustrating. You guys your work, I'm so glad you're out here with this. I can't wait. I have yet to read the book. I did listen to you guys on Mark Devlin and was amazed and cannot wait to get my hands on a copy for sure. So,
well, thank you.
Keep saying, let's cut this long story short. No, please, we want the whole story. This is so amazing and much needed, so needed. I unfortunately just lost my mother to I was going to say cancer. I lost her to chemotherapy. That's what I lost her to.
Oh, dear.
So,
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I've had a very close-up view of what the pharmacy and medical industry and just all of it. I repeatedly had to run to Oregon to help heal her from what they had done to her in the hospital or at the doctor or whatever. So, it's such a fresh air to hear this. Thank you guys so much. Continue. I'll stop interrupting.
No,
was there a personal thing that got you on this path, or was it just you're just seeing what's going on around you and just couldn't take it anymore?
It originally was a personal thing, and it was a cancer thing for close family members and friends who, in both male and female and different age groups over the years before we started the book, all diagnosed with one form of cancer or another. And all of them followed the medical advice. All of them had their chemotherapy or whatever the drug treatments, and they all died, all of them. And, at this time, sad and heart-rending as that was, I was hearing from the sort of mainstream, they're sort of bragging that, they're sort of winning the fight against cancer, that the treatments have improved and, they're claiming 50% success rates with curing cancer. And I thought, well, that's not been my experience. It's been 100% failure rate as far as the medical establishment are concerned. So I knew there was a mismatch between what the establishment was saying and what I'd experienced in my own family and friends. So that was my first wake-up call to start to look. I had some quite strong words with some of the medical establishment for their way that they'd conducted themselves, and obviously being emotionally upset with the actual loss of family and friends. So that was a very, very personal thing, which sort of started me asking questions, and as I say, then when we did start actually having to research just on viruses, the whole thing opened up. And yes, we research cancer. We feel that we understand what happens there. And, we discuss this in detail in the book as to why cancerous cells sort of occur and how they can be prevented, and what you can do about it, to sort of clear it up. The body is a fantastic thing. It's, as we say, a self-regulating organism, and providing you keep it healthy, well, one is you won't get the illnesses in the first place unless your body gets overwhelmed by toxicity, which it can, and it's very difficult nowadays to, with the amount of rubbish that's in the air, the water supplies, the food, it's very difficult, but it can be done. And as we say in the book, we boil down to 4 main factors as to what is the root cause of all illnesses. And although we try to get, it's a big book, as I say, nearly 800 pages, but we sort of try to encourage people to read it like they would a detective story, because we build the evidence through the book to show how what the medical establishment says is untrue and has no grounding in science, and what the real causes of these various diseases are, and then what you can do about it, what the mechanisms are. And we, as I say, we boil it down to 4 factors, which is lack of proper nutrition, prolonged excessive stress, toxicity from various areas, and electromagnetic frequencies, electromagnetic radiation, as some people understand it. And we talk about all these things in depth in the book, and show the reasoning for how these factors work on the body with producing what's called free radicals, which are natural things that the body produces on a daily basis, but they can be quite destructive, free radicals, unless they're mopped up and excreted from the body, which the body does naturally, providing it has all the right nutrition, basically from the food you eat, where you need antioxidants, which is the opposite to the free radicals, and they mop them up. And this is the normal process that the body goes through on a daily basis. But the body can be overwhelmed, of course, by toxicity and any of those 4 factors that we've just mentioned, or a combination of them, so that unless you're getting the correct levels of nutrition, the body's not able to cope with flushing out the free radicals, and then you start to get them attacking organs. So you start to get problems with various organs. You start to get cancerous growths, and this is what happens. These things don't happen overnight. They happen over a period of time. But if people don't notice or don't realize how to attend to these 4 factors, particularly the nutrition, which gets more and more difficult. We do recommend that people have a plant-based diet. Yes, before anyone asks, Dawn and I are sort of long-term vegetarians, and we recommend it not for any commercial reasons. It's just that we found that to be the best way to get the nutrition that you need, and particularly to go for organic, again, not for any commercial reasons, but even though the sort of fruit and veg that you buy in the shops may look okay, it may be lacking in the correct nutrients. And this is the problem with industrial farming today.
Absolutely.
Whereas they use lots of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, as I'm sure you know. So the soils that the fruit and veg is grown in is often depleted of the normal minerals that would be in the soil. So the plants, therefore, can't take up the nutrients that they would normally have done.
And of course, crop rotation is something that doesn't even exist anymore. Here where I live in South Louisiana, it's all sugar cane. And every year when they would take care of the cane and get it all cropped in and start harvesting, they would plant the fields with soybean and, rotate, keep things healthy, keep the land like it's supposed to work. You can't just keep sucking the same nutrients out of the soil all the time with the same vegetation. So unfortunately, that's all gone out the window as well. I interrupted you as well to let you guys know here in just a few seconds, we're about to hit a commercial. So we're about to take a break.
Yep. We got about a minute left before we hit our first break. We are talking to Don Lester and David Parker. Head on over to whatmakesyouill.com. Check out their website. And what you're really going to want to do is just click on over to Amazon. Their book is for sale over there. And I got to tell you, for what you're getting, it's a hell of a deal. Whether you're getting the Kindle or the actual paperback, I suggest you guys go over and get it. I know Liz in chat has her copy and says it is quite the weighty tome. Very thick, 800 pages, as David said, 10 years worth of research. So I suggest you guys head on over there and get it. We'll be right back very shortly after some quick messages with Don Lester, David Parker. This is the Ironworx on Truth Frequency Radio. We'll be right back. And really, there should be break music here, but I don't hear any. There it is. My clock was just a little off. Anyway, we'll be right back.
The reviews for Extendivite are amazing. Here are some from Amazon. September 2018. Extendivite works in keeping my blood pressure in the normal range. I've been using Extendivite for many years now. May 2018. Great product. I use regularly and I rarely get sick. March 2018. This product has relieved what appeared to be angina pain in my chest and shortness of breath after climbing stairs. I'm quite happy about it. February 2018. My husband, son, and I have been using this product for a few months now, and we have noticed an improvement in our joints and blood pressure. Tell us your story. Get Extendivite today. To order, call 1-877-928-8822. That's 1-877-928-8822, or visit heartdrop.com.
Extend your life with Extendovite.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
If you have hard water, the lime scale not only leaves white spots, it clogs pipes and breaks down appliances, costing you hundreds of dollars in energy and wear. Eliminate lime scale and other water issues like brown staining and bad odors with HydroCare water products, available from Wave Home Solutions. Wave's affordable water systems don't use salts or chemicals. You'll love the way your water tastes, smells, and looks. Satisfaction guaranteed. For more information, go to bestwater123.com. That's bestwater123.com.
For 5,000 years, the world was ruled with wooden ships by one man. 242 years ago, a small group of free men crafted a new nation built on liberty and freedom. Global elites have been fighting to destroy this new nation called America ever since. Based on actual events, Charm of Favor tells a true story of how they corrupted the election system. They infiltrated federal agencies and murdered witnesses, judges, and even presidents to keep from being caught. Now, the largest and wealthiest crime syndicate the world has ever known has been drawn out of the shadows. They have killed hundreds of Americans and recently attempted to assassinate half our congressmen. Still, they escape arrest through an almost supernatural charm of favor. Read Charm of Favor and be prepared to open your eyes to what may lie just around the corner. Charm of Favor is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
No hate, no hype, no fear.
You're listening to Truth Frequency Radio.
We are TFR.
the iron you need to get what you want.
Good morning.
And welcome back to the Ironworx. We shall not dilly-dally. We are joined by Dawn Lester and David Parker discussing their book, What Really Makes You Ill, Why Everything You Thought You Knew About Disease is Wrong. Man, that is a mouthful of a title.
It sure is.
But I think it's indicative of, again, the size of the book you're getting. That's 800 pages. Man, I got to tell you, that's quite the endeavor you guys took. Did you intend it to be that big? Or did it just sort of turn out?
It just, I mean, it could have easily been twice as big, no joke. I mean, because like with any research, and particularly over a 10-year period, you cover so much stuff, so many papers and books, and that the biggest problem was how much to leave out. And this was something Dawn and I had to decide about because we could see how it was growing.
We've often said, actually, that we could have written a book about each chapter, and there are 10 chapters in that book. So, we decided probably best not to do a 10-volume set because that would just be immense. But so it was a question of trying to get enough information that would give people a very good, clear picture with as much detail as we could to kind of back up what we were saying, but at the same time make it readable, and also to it's kind of getting the right balance, giving enough information without overloading people, but making sure that there was plenty of evidence to back up what we were saying. And there are lots of quoted extracts in there from all kinds of places, all sorts of people, from fairly recent to last century to even back in the 19th century, certainly with the chapter on vaccination, that we really dug deep back into history for that, just to see what was that, what the origin of that was, for where it started, how it started, what's it all about, what's it based on. And again, like with the whole germ theory thing, it's not based on science, not any real science. But going back to the what we were saying sort of earlier about the whole thing that's going on, nonsense that's going on now, is that as well as people believing what the medical establishment are saying, so many people still believe that this thing called a virus is actually a living organism, and it isn't. It's simply a particle of genetic material wrapped in a protein coating. It has no mechanisms by which it can be called living. It has no metabolism. It's nothing that sort of eats or breathes or excretes. It doesn't move. It is inert. It really doesn't fly around and attack people. It just is not a particle. It isn't a living particle. It's just an inert particle. And I think so many people still believe it's some kind of living thing that is out there, and it's got all these wonderful graphics, these wonderful images of different bits and spikes and all sorts of things, and everyone thinks it's some kind of monster from outer space or something that goes around like a sort of Pac-Man attacking them or whatever. But it just isn't. It's a particle. And a minute particle of, as David said before, measures nanometers, that even if it could travel, it would certainly travel through everything all the materials that are being used as masks. But the thing is that there is nothing to travel. It does not. It's not self-propelled. It doesn't have its own way of moving. So there's no way it flies through the air, jumping between person and person to infect them and attack them and cause them to be ill.
And there has been experiments done both in the past and present to show whether any of these diseases, the flu in particular, there was quite some extensive tests done very early on around the First World War to see if they could pass the flu from one infected person to a healthy person. And it was an American medical establishment that conducted some of these tests. They're all there. We mention them, talk about them in our book, where they sort of took teams of infected people suffering with the symptoms of the flu, to try and see if that they could pass those germs to a number of healthy people, by sitting directly in front of them and not only coughing directly in the face of the healthy person a number of times, but even by sort of taking mucus extract, shall we say, from the infected people and sort of transferring them to the healthy people. And all of these tests that they did, they couldn't make any of the healthy people ill with the flu, no matter how hard they tried. So not many people are perhaps aware of that, but so to us that's not surprising, because there's no evidence to show, as Dawn has just said, because these things that they call viruses are not living creatures, unlike bacteria, which are, of course, but the virus particles are not. And as I say, through all the experiments they've done to see if they could pass on a disease, they've failed to do so. So we're not denying that people get ill. Of course they do. People get ill, some very seriously ill, and people die. But it's nothing to do with germs. And really that's the whole basis of the book. We've looked at that. We've looked at the germ theory. We've looked to see if it can be proved, and it can't. We take the ground that the burden of proof is on those who propose a theory. Well, it's called the germ theory, which is proposed by the medical establishment. So it's duty bound for them to prove that their theory is correct, and they failed to do so. There are certain basic things. So if we just take viruses, for instance, there are certain basic things that they should do. And that is, first of all, is to isolate the virus and purify it, and then to fully categorize it to show what its genetic makeup is, and then prove categorically that in its purified form, that is the sole cause of whatever disease they're attributing to it. Fairly simple, straightforward steps. And they failed to do that on any virus ever. And that's including this so-called coronavirus nonsense. So these are basic things, and we've put that challenge out many times. And we've talked to other doctors, and some of them are already starting to come out on the internet, and I'm sure you've heard them say the same things. Those tests have never been done, and so it beggars belief how they can attribute so much illness to something that has never been proved to actually cause any illness. And they're doing it now. And this whole world shutdown that they've done is based on a complete, well, I'm not being too uncharitable when I say a complete lie, because there are people behind all this who know very well that they can't prove it. Otherwise, why aren't those papers available? And we're not the only people who've looked for them. Some quite big luminaries in the past have looked for them, not least of which is Kary Mullis, who invented PCR, which is, of course, the test that they're using to sort of test for this, something which in his lifetime, he died last year, I think, something that he said his test was never designed to do this. You're going to get all sorts of false readings from it, and sure enough, that's what they're doing, but they do it within their favour. So, he knew very well that, and he also looked for the papers. He looked for the papers to find the virus for HIV. And he said they're not there, and yet we're still living under that shadow, even though there was all sorts of doomsday prophecies when it first came out in the 80s. And I remember it very well, that it was going to sweep the world, millions were going to die. Whether you were heterosexual or homosexual didn't make any difference. It was something that was going to get everybody. And they're saying the same thing about the coronavirus. Well, obviously the HIV epidemic did not sweep the world, and in spite of the sort of numbers that they put out for people with HIV are groundless, because again the tests are, well, they're just nonsense. They don't prove anything, as I think people who've looked into it know, because they're just antibody tests, which is exactly what they're doing for coronavirus. And with the HIV test, for the antibodies, you can have those antibodies in your blood for all sorts of reasons. I think someone worked out there was about 70 different reasons where you'd have those particular antibodies in your blood, which is nothing to do with having HIV/AIDS. And one of the reasons was if you're a woman and were pregnant, you would have those antibodies in your blood. So, it makes you wonder how many pregnant women have been labelled HIV positive based on absolutely nothing. And of course, these things ruin people's lives. And we're getting the same thing now with this coronavirus thing. People are going to get tested with a test that's worthless and could be classed as being positive, and then at the very least have to sort of self-isolate for weeks on end. But we know that probably in the pipeline they've got some vaccination which they're wanting to sell to the world, or the pharmaceutical companies do anyway, and make billions out of it. But, money isn't the object of this exercise, as I'm sure many of your listeners know. It can't be, because the people that run the show, if you like, these unelected people behind the scenes, they have all the money they want. They own the banks, they own all the resources. They don't need the money. So you have to say, well, what is it about then? So it's got to be about controlling people, isn't it? That's the only thing it can be, about controlling people, which is what they're doing. And of course, some people, the mask wearers, and you guys know who you are, they're walking straight into it with open arms. And, they're probably going to be the ones who are lining up for this first batch of vaccinations, which, we can talk about vaccinations in a bit more detail. As Dawn said earlier, we went right back into history to look where this whole idea of inoculation and vaccination started. And it's a bankrupt process. There's absolutely no scientific evidence to show that any vaccinations, and I mean any vaccinations, confer immunity. But there is plenty of evidence to show that they confer harm, and that's the big thing. So we've got two sort of things coming up here with the coronavirus thing. One is they've never isolated a virus to prove that it's a pathogen. And so how can you then make a vaccine, even if these things worked? How can you make a vaccine to prevent something that you haven't even proved existed? So the whole thing is a nonsense. But as I say, vaccinations have never been proved to work. So what the easy answer for anyone who might be considering whether the new vaccination that's going to come along is a good thing or not is just ask yourself, well, if vaccinations have never been proved to confer immunity, but they have been proved to confer a lot of harm, then the best thing is not to have one, is not to have a vaccination, because whatever is in it, and I know there's lots of speculations to what might be in this new vaccine, but the point is whatever is in it, it's not going to do you any good. And that's really all you need to know, is it's not going to do you any good, and it has the potential to cause you a lot of harm. So best to avoid it.
Can I make one extra point? In terms of isolating a virus, we've said, that it's never been performed. No virus has ever been isolated, and we have had people writing to us saying, with links to various papers that say, study papers that say, isolation of virus. What we've discovered is that the scientists use the term isolate or isolation of a virus. What they mean by that is not what we would generally understand to mean as in isolating. I mean, if you're going to isolate something, that means you remove it from everything else around it. But it just doesn't mean that at all. It's a much more complicated process, and it involves adding a whole load of other chemicals and various things, and antibiotics and animal substances and to some kind of mix, and then when they draw a genetic material or something from this mix, they think that that's originated from the patient, from the material they've taken from their body. But once they've mixed it up with all this other stuff, who knows what was in the other stuff? That's never tested for. It's quite it's quite messy, but it's not a very precise thing. And as I say, these scientists call it isolation of a virus, and I've read a number of papers that under the heading isolation of virus, you think. You read it and you think that doesn't sound like isolating something. It's quite deceptive, really. So before somebody sends us a whole load of links to loads of papers that say isolation of virus, including since December last year when this whole coronavirus started, there have been some papers where they refer to isolation, but it certainly isn't what should be understood as isolation. So I just want to make that point clear. It's quite messy.
And it's not, as I said earlier, it's not only the isolation of it. You've got to be able to categorise its full genetic makeup and then prove that it's the sole cause of a disease. So there's at least 3 distinctive parts to it. It's not just a case of saying, oh, we've isolated it. As Dawn quite rightly says, no, they haven't.
But the other thing is that when they say about proving that it causes disease, some of the things that they use is actually injecting material into various animals and all sorts of tests. And that's, well, first of all, injecting the material is not the way that the virus is supposed to be kind of transmitted between people. So you can't prove infection because you're actually injecting something into an animal body. And natural animals are the same as humans. Their bodies react to foreign substances being put into them, and most of the substances that are injected are toxic anyway. So, kind of the body reacts and in a bad way and then becomes ill. And you say, oh, yes, that's the virus. And go, no, that's all the toxic materials. So
I mean,
that's an overview. But anyway,
they did this with going back to the early days of polio, and with the experiments they did then, they tried to see if they could transfer polio to animals. And one of the experiments they did was, as Dawn had said, a mishmash of toxic material, which they then drilled a hole in a monkey's head and injected it into its brain. And when the monkey became paralyzed, they said, oh, there you go, you see, we've transferred polio to it. It is
this is called science.
But this is, you think, well, what did you expect, It just beggars belief with the nonsense that they've performed in the name of science. But when you look into it, you think, well, you don't need to be very scientific to realise that that's just nonsense.
And we do cover quite a few of those kinds of experiments. So just to show the kinds of things that they're doing to so-called prove transmission of viruses. So, we've got a few examples in the book just to illustrate the point. We've got the details, got the sources.
I mean, there's obviously quite a few people around the world who've got very profitable jobs in virology.
Oh, yes.
I'm trying to think how I can be charitable about describing this, but I mean, I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of Dr. Stefan Lanka, German virologist. Well, he was a virologist. He's so disgruntled with the whole thing that he refuses to be called a virologist anymore, even though he's actually qualified as one and worked as one for many years. He's still a doctor, of course. But, he's on record as stating that neither he nor his team ever found proof that any virus was the cause of any disease, which is quite an astounding statement to be made by a virologist. But he did that. And as again, I think it's worth repeating that he did challenge the medical establishment in Germany, in the German courts, to see if they could prove whether a virus was the cause of measles. And there was a couple of court cases, and eventually went to the High Court, and it was found in his favour. The medical establishment, even though they threw all their best guns at it and as much money as they could not prove that there was a virus that caused measles. Now, one is that's astounding, and you thought that should have made world headlines, but of course it didn't. And we know, again, as I said earlier, why, because the media's complicit in this fraud. But what really beggars belief is, in spite of the German government High Court ruling that there is no virus to cause measles, in which case, what's the vaccination about? But in March of this year, the German government mandated that all school children must be vaccinated against measles. Now, that you just think, well, if nothing else proves just how corrupted the governments of the world are and the media of the world are, I think that proves it really. When in their own court it's been proved that there is no virus that causes measles, and then some months later you mandate that all school children must be vaccinated against measles. And this is the problem we have. It's no good anyone thinking that they can appeal to the authorities for common sense and justice, because it clearly isn't there. So it's only going to be the people, en masse as it were, that can make these changes.
Well, it's just astounding that we, have the power, we have the numbers, we have the ability to take all this back. We always have, but for some reason, well, I mean, we know there's many reasons: the media, the culture, the school systems, all of it, that has people so just complacent, I guess. As I watched my family go through this madness with this COVIDiocy, and just could not make them see reason and talk about any viewpoint that might be outside of what they're seeing on TV and on the computers. It's just so frustrating that it's that deep in their psyche. It's almost like they need it, like they want it, like it's like a game they're trying to win. I don't know. It's just, I'm probably ranting because I was so close to it and I couldn't believe what I was watching happen around me.
Yeah, we come across this a lot, both in our own family and friends, of course. Some take it on board and look into it, but the vast majority, as you say, they are just blindsided to it, and only believe what they see on the television, only believe what the media are telling them or what their doctor's telling them, and they never for one moment think of just having a look. Just have a look. There's plenty of information there. I mean, I hasten to say, we've put most of it in our book, but it is there. They can see it for themselves.
It certainly is.
We've sort of written the book, as Dawn said earlier. We've tried to keep as much jargon out of it as possible, so that it's not dumbed down. All the facts are there, but we wanted it to be easily read and understood by everyone. That you don't need to be a medical scientist or anything with that to be able to understand it.
Well, according to Liz, our Iron Realm maiden there in chat, she said the book is big, but it is extremely well written and easy to read. So that's a high praise. We love Liz.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, Liz actually had a question. Liz had a question earlier about the weaponization of viruses, and the fact that there's a whole part of this war machine dedicated to biological germ warfare. And she was just curious is that, I guess anthrax is a bacteria, so I guess that's not necessarily virus related, but what are your thoughts on this whole idea of germ warfare? Again, just as much nonsense, because it's all based on this whole premise of germ theory, which is, of course, unproven.
Yes, pretty much. I mean, it's not to say that some kind of weapon can't be made if they're using particles, but to actually make it dangerous to human or harmful to human health, there's got to be chemicals, toxic chemicals added, or they've got to be irradiated or something like that. On their own, these particles and even bacteria, which are living organisms, there is absolutely no evidence that on their own they cause any harm to human health. In fact, the human body contains many trillions of bacteria. I mean, the human body is the normal home of bacteria, so we've got them all the time, and they don't cause harm. They're extremely useful.
They're beneficial, right? Exactly.
Sorry. So in order to make them harmful to humans, they've got to be we don't know what they do to them to make them harmful, but it's got to be something that makes them toxic. So or create some kind of toxic compound, even if it's got these either the particles or bacteria in them, but they've been made toxic, they've been made harmful by some other processes, and it's the other processes that are the weapons part of it, not the actual bacteria. In fact, you're talking about anthrax. We looked at anthrax And there is a section in the book about it to show that it's the origins of it are probably related to, again, a chemical used for animal husbandry and toxic washes and those kinds of chemicals. I can't remember the exact name off the top of my head at the moment, but there is a section in the book. And in fact, we cover quite a few animal diseases as well as human diseases, certainly what are called referred to as infectious diseases of animals, simply because we thought, well, okay, once we realised that germ theory was rubbish, to put it bluntly, as far as human health is concerned, we thought, well, what about these animal diseases? What about things like mad cow disease, yes, that was an English thing, anthrax. We even looked at myxomatosis. So there's a small chapter that deals with a number of these animal diseases.
Oh, look at that.
Ah, that would be break music.
That would be.
So we're going to take a quick break. We will certainly be right back with Don Lester and David Parker and talk more about what actually makes you ill. Make sure you come right back to the Ironworks. Breaks here for the fear. Right here.
Hi, my name is Ella, and I'm 10 years old. I'm one of the millions of children born to parents suffering from the sheeple virus. Symptoms include the inability to think for oneself, the attention span of a goldfish, and a strong belief in government and the mainstream media.
How dare you!
It is estimated that 1 out of every 2 children are being raised by parents infected with the sheeple virus. But there is a cure. For as little as 19 cents per day, you can become a TFR supporter and help children like me get their daily dose of truth. Together, we will make sure every child has protection from deception.
That's good.
An order on police training soon. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. That's what President Trump is promising.
It's a 4-step plan. The president laid it out in Dallas with faith leaders, law enforcement, and business owners. First, it would aggressively pursue economic development in minority communities. It would include confronting healthcare disparities. It would encourage police departments to meet standards for use of force, and it would renew calls in Congress for school choice.
Fox's Griff Jenkins in an exclusive interview, the president telling Fox's Harris Faulkner there has to be a balance.
We are going to do lots of, I think, good things, but we also have to keep our police and our law enforcement strong. They have to do it right. They have to be trained in a proper manner. They have to do it right.
The president also called the death of George Floyd in police custody 8 minutes of horror. The president again said anarchists must not be allowed to continue holding several blocks in Seattle. Yesterday, a handful of police officers tried to reoccupy the police station abandoned Monday, but were turned away by protesters. Seattle's police chief Carmen Best making it clear she disapproved of the decision to withdraw from the East Precinct.
The decision to board up the precinct, our home, the first precinct I worked in, was something I have been holding off. You should know, leaving the precinct was not my decision.
Seattle's mayor has called the occupation of a 7-block area of her city more like a block party. Search for a man who police say ambushed a California sheriff's deputy ended in gunfire yesterday. Police were fired upon again, they say, by suspect Mason Lira. He was then killed by police return gunfire, although 2 deputies were wounded in the shootout. Signs pointing to a possible rebound on Wall Street. Dow futures are trading more than 400 points higher. America is listening to Fox News.
Into the truth frequency. Your protection from deception. This is Truth Frequency Radio.
Wake up! Wake up!
What is dark matter?
Okay, we don't know.
That's great. That's why it's called dark.
It's exactly.
Everyone knows all reputable information comes from random people on the internet. Tell me things, internet. The earth is flat. It's like school in your hand.
Okay, dark matter is something we do not know what it is. We believe that dark matter is there, but we have never detected it. Well, what I'm afraid of course, is that there is no dark matter out there.
There was one?
There is no dark matter out there. We need to think really hard, Thank
God it's Friday!
And it is Friday. Welcome back to the second hour of the Ironworx right here on Truth Frequency Radio. Josh, Walt, and Zach hanging out with everybody this morning. We are joined by Dawn Lester and David Parker. Oh, man, I got to tell you, this has been such an awesome show so far. I am just thoroughly enjoying this. We had a question earlier in chat from Daz, and Daz was asking about herd immunity in regards to vaccines. And was there a section in your book where you guys covered this notion of herd immunity?
Yes, we do, because it actually doesn't exist. There's no such thing. We do cover the point. The idea is that if enough people are vaccinated, then that protects everybody else. But the fact that no disease is caused by any so-called germ, it completely undermines the whole premise on which vaccinations based, and therefore it just the whole herd immunity idea falls apart as well. The point is also that it's admitted, and I believe it's a quote from the WHO that said there's no such thing as a perfect vaccine. It doesn't protect everyone, and sometimes this is paraphrased, but sometimes it does hurt people. They acknowledge that there are occasionally some an odd injury, but of course that's just kind of a sort of collateral damage, if you like. They don't use that term, of course, but that's a kind of idea that they say, oh, well, it's a shame, but millions, it's sort of 1 in a million. But when you start looking at the statistics, it's actually a lot higher than that. And in fact, probably everyone who receives the vaccination has their health affected because of the toxic ingredients. The fact that they don't have symptoms immediately doesn't necessarily mean it hasn't harmed them. But no, the whole idea that any vaccine can immunize everybody by having, I don't know, 90% or whatever it is vaccinated, it just is. There's no scientific basis for that, and yes, we do explain it. So
yeah, I think to make it really clear, because it's such an important point, as I said earlier, it has never been proven in the 100-odd years that they've been trying to vaccinate people against disease. It has never ever been proven that any vaccine, confers immunity. So therefore, on that basis alone, how can you get herd immunity? And secondly, as I say, it has never been proved that any germ causes a disease. So what are vaccinations about anyway? So those are just two easy points for people to bear in mind. So yes, this herd immunity thing is just a fiction. And it may be a good point to just talk a little bit about this thing of immunity, because it's bandied around quite a lot, where vaccines are supposed to boost your immunity against whatever the disease is, or certain things that you can do or take can increase your immunity. Well, it's a bit of a misnomer, really. The body doesn't have, this may sound surprising, the body doesn't have what you would call an immune system. It has a health system. So not having an immune system as such, there is nothing in the body that you can either vaccinate or do something to boost protection. There isn't a mechanism for it. And there are several immunologists who are the head of their field, and I think we quote them in the book, who've said, if someone was to ask them, what's my immune system like? The guy said, and this is a professor of immunology, said, I'd have no idea how to answer that question. So they don't know. They really don't know. The body doesn't have an immune system. As I say, it has a health system. And if you do the things that we've suggested as simple things, which is to have a proper diet and have the right intake of antioxidants in your fruit and veg, and avoid the toxins and avoid EMFs as much as you can,
keep the stress
levels down, then that gives you the healthy system, which then gives you, if you like to use the word immunity, or gives you the immunity against ill health. But you can't boost the system because it doesn't have this elusive immune system that doctors would like you to believe, because the whole vaccination thing rests on the fact that you're supposed to have an immune system that they can give you a vaccine which boosts your immune system to protect you against these fictitious diseases caused by germs. So the whole thing sort of ties together. They can't have one without the other. But once you take away some of these building blocks that they have, like, well, first of all, you've got to prove that germs actually cause a disease, particularly viruses. If you take that building block out, it all falls down. Secondly, if you say, well, even if these germs did exist and could be proved to cause diseases, you're going to have to prove that vaccines actually give you some protection. They can't do that either. So the whole thing soon falls apart with just a little bit of research, and we did more than just a little bit. But it's easy to see that the whole medical system is based on fallacies, really.
You said before, earlier about, it's a long title, but that's one of the reasons that we included the phrase, why everything you thought you knew about disease is wrong, is because people think that diseases are entities that attack them, and that's why you've got to have an immune system that fights these diseases or disease entities or these germs or whatever it is. So the whole idea is a warfare model, which is why they use toxic chemicals, and all pharmaceuticals are petrochemicals that are toxic to the body. Whatever they say. So, sorry?
I said, oh, yeah, definitely the petrochemical aspect of it is key, I think.
Yeah, so it's a whole warfare model. So you've got to have these toxic chemicals to fight the disease or the germ or the disease process, or to stop, block, whatever it is they're fighting against some kind of disease process. And that's completely the wrong way to look at how the body works, as we've said before. It's a self-regulating organism, and it's and again, the medical establishment gives the body no kind of credit for being able to do anything. It's like it's an inert kind of machine that's got no means of doing anything apart from maybe sort of the immune system fights germs. But the body is amazing. It's absolutely brilliant, and it's got all kinds of mechanisms that can look after itself, repair itself. All kinds of a number of different organs have been shown to be they can be repaired but also be regrown, and health can be restored, like David said, if you address all the causes. But it doesn't work as a warfare model. The body isn't a battleground where the immune system is fighting disease, and so that's again why we say that the immune system is a misnomer. It's not an appropriate label. The body is a functioning health system, and that can look after itself, but you do need to help it, to support it by giving it everything it needs, and to try and minimize all the things that it doesn't need, which is being attacked by all kinds of toxins from everywhere, from all sorts of products that you use. So many everyday products contain, ever more toxic chemicals. It's just, it's horrible to say, back to label reading, but you really have to be aware of the ingredients of everything you buy that you're going to put either on or in your body, because you need to be able to help the health system function properly by not poisoning it as much as possible.
I mean, we have a section in the book that, and this was a surprise to us when we came to, about sort of toxic clothes, the clothes you wear. People may think, oh, well, what I eat and drink and inhale, that's where the toxins get in. But yeah, and also the clothes you wear. And I don't know whether many of you've noticed, I know I was saying this to someone the other day, trying to buy a pair of socks that has not got some biological ingredient in it, supposedly to kill bacteria. Well, I don't want that on my feet, thank you very much. But it gets increasingly difficult. But even the sort of man-made materials that your clothes are made of, many, again, petrochemical based, and stuff can leach into your skin. So this is yet another way that toxins get into your body.
And they can be irritants, and why people get skin rashes and all sorts of problems. They think it might be something they've eaten or whatever, but it could be something to do with the clothes. It's dyes and plasticizers and phthalates
and fragrances.
Oh, yes.
One of the most harmful things out there, and it's in almost everything you wash with, bathe with, put on your hair, spray in the air, have some kind of oil burner in the corner. It's amazing what people have, and they're just inhaling it all the time.
Absolutely. So it's not surprising that people have respiratory problems and then they try and blame it on some virus. And of course, it's not the virus. And this may be why some people have a problem accepting that it's a virus or accepting that it's not a virus, shall we say, because it means that they've got to really take a good look at everything that they use, everything that they eat, all the products and everything that they buy. It really requires them to have a good look at the way their lifestyle, and it requires them to make some changes, or most people have to make some changes. And there are obviously a lot of people that are resistant to change, but if they want to actually be healthy and not have problems, then they really seriously need to look at it. Sounds like we're being sort of fairly strict and disciplinary, and we're not, but it's more and more difficult, as you said earlier. It's getting more and more difficult. There's so much in our environment, in the products we use, everything we eat. It's just surrounding us that it's not surprising people are getting, more people are getting more ill. But we need to be aware of that and try and minimize that if we don't want to be ill. And then the healthier you are, the better it is, not only for your actual health, but your financial health, because you're not then tied into these huge costs for medical care, well, so-called medical care, but yeah.
I mean, one of the things we've not talked about so far, but I think is more than worth mentioning, again, it is covered in the book, but and that's electromagnetic frequencies.
Absolutely.
It really is a big issue, and much denied, of course, by the authorities, who do everything they can to stop you talking about it. And as I mentioned earlier, some shows that we've been on, we're not allowed to mention certain words like 5G. But thankfully we can say so on your show.
Absolutely.
But it's not just 5G that people need to worry about. It's electromagnetic radiation generally. So from the advent of sort of telecommunications, shall we say, in the early 1900s, the situation has got worse and worse. And from the amount of towers that go up, the problem right from, I think, when it was 1901, I think, when Marconi made his first transatlantic radio call. And from that time, and that was from the Isle of Wight, so this is a tiny island just off the south coast of the UK. And from that moment on, it can be tracked as the more radio antennas that went up, the rates of certain illnesses also rose. But some of the most interesting things in the early days that people were noticing, and this was all over the world, particularly in America as well, with things like homing pigeons. I think people understand what I'm saying about this, where we call them pigeon fanciers in the UK, where you have groups of pigeons that they race, they set them off, and they go off on a circuit and come back. And they can be quite prized animals. But what the pigeon fanciers, both in the UK and America, were noticing that less and less of their pigeons were coming back. Whereas at one stage they could release 200 pigeons and they'd all come back. It got to the stage where 80% of them wouldn't come back. And this is a huge number, and no one understood what was happening. But the work, again, cutting a long story short, there were investigations made, and they saw that wherever there was the flight paths of the pigeons on their circuits, went through areas of where you'd got either radar or telecommunications antennae. That's where the problems were. And again, as we probably know, homing pigeons, like many animals and insects, have they're sort of their own inbuilt radar systems. And of course, it was the radio telecommunication masts that were interfering with these, and the pigeons were literally losing their way and never returned home. And the same experiments, similar experiments, have been done with bees and beehives, where, again, all over the world, hives were being reported to be collapsing. The bees were dying or not returning. The queen bee was starving to death because the worker bees were not coming back to feed her, and people were losing their beehives all over the world. Now, to start with, as usual, the establishment said, there's some virus attacking the bees. That's always the first thing they blame, is there's a new virus. But again, cut a long story short, it was proved that there was no virus attacking the bees. And various experiments have been done around the world, including some in Japan, to show again that it was telecommunication interference. And they've done some very interesting experiments to show this quite easily, even just putting a cell phone underneath a beehive, and the bees don't return. And that's just one cell phone, because they lose where they are. And then because they don't return, they don't feed the queen dies, hive gone. And this has been happening. So it's been shown how the telecommunications, electromagnetic radiation, is affecting wildlife. And this has been done with birds as well, or not just pigeons, all sorts of birds, storks, breeding. It not only affects their homing instincts, it affects their reproduction, and not only producing less offspring, but malformed offspring. And, this has become worse and worse worldwide. Now, of course, it doesn't take much of a leap of faith to realize that if it's affecting birds, animals, and insects, then it's going to be affecting human beings. And of course it does. And there's many diseases, and we talk about some of these. The medical establishment puts them under the label of autoimmune diseases, and this is where they try to blame the body for attacking itself, because they've not been able to blame it on a bacteria or a virus. So, we'll blame the body then. We'll say the body's attacking itself. So things like multiple sclerosis and some of these neurological diseases, they just say, well, the body's gone haywire, it doesn't know what it's doing, and it's attacking itself. Well, again, I can say categorically there is absolutely no evidence for that being the cause. But there is plenty of evidence to show these neurological diseases are caused by electromagnetic radiation and chemical toxicity. Particularly diseases like multiple sclerosis, where the myelin sheathing of the nerves slowly deteriorates. And so the electrical messages, because I should make it clear that the body is not just a chemical system, it's an electrochemical system. So there's very sensitive electrical signals. The heart, for instance, works on electricity. That's what makes it pump. So if you interfere with those electrical pulses, you're going to cause problems. And heart disease, again, that can be tracked to have got worse all over the world since the introduction of telecommunication systems. And in areas where you've got more high-powered telecommunication systems, you have higher incidence of these diseases, such as heart disease. We seem to have some stuff coming up on the screen here.
I shared a little a meme I had gotten a little while back that shows those dates you're trying to remember here. The introduction of radio waves in 1918 was when the Spanish flu kicked off. Then 79, 1G launched, big influenza outbreak. 91, 2G cholera outbreak. 98, 3G, big influenza outbreak again. 4G. In 2009, the N1H1 bull, which I remember fighting with my sister about endlessly because she was still in the hospitals during that time. And I kept telling her, it's just bullshit, Amanda, stop tripping. And she just was in terror, like psychotic about it. Oh, anyway, sorry. And then, of course, we have the 5G current. So,
it's certainly a factor. Yeah, absolutely.
There's been lots of studies done where there are either schools or even army establishments, of course, where they've got radar installations on the base, and there are higher incidences of certain illnesses, both neurological and heart disease, in those areas. And then we're talking about fit young men who are then coming down with these things. Again, without going into it too much, we could spend a whole program talking about it, but the electromagnetic side of things is quite a serious and growing factor. And although people, quite rightly, are worried about the introduction of 5G and the frequencies, one of the things that doesn't get talked about very much is the amount of satellites that are being launched, and certainly this year by a guy I'm sure you all know, Elon Musk, who's got SpaceX, and he's got licenses to launch 20,000 satellites this year alone, and he's applied for licenses to launch another 40,000. And on top of that, both Amazon and Facebook and Google are also launching satellites. Now, these are low orbit satellites. They're only about 200 miles up, which is not very much actually. They're tiny, quite small, but the idea is that they will completely circle the globe, so there won't be any point on the globe that is not being irradiated by microwave emissions. Now, it might be one thing we're told, 5G, this requires lots of little transmitters on lampposts and things, and because it can't see through trees and it can't see through walls. And so people may be lulled into a false sense of security of thinking that they're, okay, well, I should be okay then. I've got lots of trees around my house or whatever. It's not going to get into me. The fact that they may have a router then in their house, which is then transmitting it. But the thing is, the microwave transmissions from these thousands, literally tens of thousands of satellites that are starting to circulate the Earth, in addition to the ones that are already there, and there's a couple of thousand up there already, there's no hiding place. And this is, to me, quite a worrying situation, knowing the amount of illness that this microwave radiation can cause and the ways to try and avoid it, which is, I don't have any ready answers at the moment. It was suggested by someone, well, can't we live in a Faraday cage? Well, you could, and it would protect you from the radiation, but it also, the body needs, it's in tune with the Earth itself, which puts out a certain resonance. I think it's just under 8 hertz. And you need to be in touch with that. Otherwise, all your body rhythms and that just go completely haywire. So no, you can't live in a Faraday cage.
Got to get on that bare foot. I got to get on that bare earth with bare feet. That's important.
Yes.
It is. Grounding is very important, and should be done every day if you can. Go and have a walk down your lawn or something, or along the beach, or get in the sea. That all grounds you. That's good. But it's just to be aware of EMFs. They are responsible for a lot of illness and increasing illness over the decades that it's been increasing, and unfortunately it's getting worse and is responsible for a lot of illness. Something that we're trying to look into to see if there are ways that people can protect themselves more from this type of radiation.
Well, I know our friend Mark Devlin, you guys were on his show not too far back. He is doing his best to develop a line of clothing that will help with some of that blocking the electromagnetic radiation. I know he had the phone case design is out there. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I've checked in with Mark. I need to get him back on here pretty soon. But yeah, there's people trying to make some steps, but
it's fortunate that a lot of the bits of technology that people are desperately trying to get together to protect them are, what should we say? They're not. They're not actually effective. I mean, I know you mentioned phone cases there, and I've seen some strange things that people want to put, but they must realise that if they put their phone in an effective case that cuts out radiation, then the phone's not going to work. It stands to reason that it can't transmit or receive if it's in a suitably isolating case. I've seen some strange things, but hats off to anyone who's trying to come up with something to protect themselves, because it does need to be done. But at the moment, I haven't seen anything that's particularly effective or effective at all. But hopefully something will come up.
But as you say, grounding, connecting with the earth as much as possible, because I mean, you know, everyone wears clothes, shoes, whatever, and doesn't think about being connected to the earth, to nature. Not again, we've not looked into it in detail, but that certainly is part of helping to do that. And if people can do that daily, but again, the 4 factors we were talking about, the fourth one, again, stress, well, excessive stress, also falls into this because, again, all of the media is putting out fear, well, basically fear porn, and so many people are buying into it and then becoming extremely stressed, worried, fearful, and that is definitely adversely affecting their health. Because with stress, it's not just the hormones that are released, you know, the fight or flight hormones, but increasing stress does increase the generation of free radicals. So again, in the same way that...
it's amazing how people have been raving about iAlife all over Facebook. They've been posting their testimonials just because they want to get the word out because it's worked so well.
Sorry, we are apparently at a commercial break right now.
Right, it popped early this time. It really did, because I'm checking it regular.
I wasn't checking it regular, and that's how I knew it popped on, was because I saw I was already read and we weren't coming through anymore. It said muted, so I said, oh, well, shit. But yeah, sometimes the music doesn't come through where we're talking over it, and
we were wrapped up in the conversation for damn sure. We got about 30 minutes, give or take, after we get back from the commercials. Is there any area of this we haven't gotten to you guys want to touch on?
Well, we were. It's a case of which bits to talk about.
I know, there's so much. My goodness.
I don't know whether. I mean, in the book, we, as Dawn had said earlier, we looked at to test our own theories, if you like, to test whether this lack of scientific ability to prove that diseases are caused by germs. We looked at animal diseases as well and found that, you know, it does ring true. You know, there is no proof that the animal diseases are caused by germs either. And there are very much more plausible reasons as to why these animals get sick. We can talk a little bit more about that. And we even went back, because it was a interesting topic. We talked about, we looked back at the so-called Black Death, you know, the plague.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would be great.
We could talk a little bit about that to just show how.
Well, that kind of thing, the history of things like that we've all been scared with, like Daz and Chat mentioned the legend of us giving the Native Americans the tainted blankets with smallpox on it, that kind of thing. So yeah, we can touch on some of those historical lies if you would like. That's great.
Yes. Yeah, we can do that.
Awesome. Well, I will go ahead and throw the studio back in. We're not necessarily broadcasting out on TFR, but I think we are broadcasting out on YouTube. So take that for what it's worth. But I'll go ahead and throw the studio back in, and we'll get this last segment out of the way. Thanks again, guys. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Fear filtered realm of triviality so fear-filled and grim. Break clear of the fear right here, Tuesdays and Fridays at 2 a.m. on TFR. Josh and I and you will hammer out the impurities of technology-driven groupthink, fold in a dash of logic, and quench it all with a bit of absurdity. The Ironworx. Break clear of the fear.
We are TFR.
My faith in destiny is all I need to prevail.
Truth Frequency Radio.
Space is hard.
Here's a message of importance to millions of people who are continually pale and washed out, weak and run down. Doctors will tell you that these conditions are often caused by a deficiency of iron. The iron you need to keep you physically fit and mentally alert. Medical studies show that 2 out of 3 women and many, many men lack the daily iron your body requires in a form your body can easily use and put to work for you.
Not for me, okay?
Every dose gives you more than your daily minimum iron requirement.
We are awake, we are awake, we are not alone. We are striving for more.
So if you're not getting the iron your body needs, if you feel weak, run down, and are easily upset, start taking iron today.
And welcome back to the Ironworx. Man, what a show this has been so far. I could not agree more. Stephen Hawking, high praise indeed. Thank you so much for chiming in. We do appreciate you tuning in and listening as well, Stephen, from the great beyond. We are joined this morning by Dawn Lester and David Parker. This has been an absolute enjoyable show. Again, it's not often we get guests on this early in the morning, so we really do appreciate you hanging out with us. This is great. This is information that definitely needs to get out there.
And this is the problem, that people need to realize just how much they've been lied to. I sort of like to bring in actually some words from you listeners might be familiar with the English writer, Victorian writer Charles Dickens, and one of his stories, A Tale of Two Cities, he opens the first chapter with the words, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." And I think those words apply very much to where we are with this whole coronavirus thing, and I'll explain why I say that. It's the worst of times because of the lie that's been perpetrated on the whole world with the lockdown and the misery and deaths that they've caused totally unnecessarily based on a lie. So from that point of view, it is the worst of times. We've never seen anything like this before, ever. But the best of times also, because the authorities, the perpetrators of this lie, you don't have to look very hard to see that they've now exposed themselves. They've overstepped the mark. It can be easily seen, and work like ours shows that everything they're doing is based on a lie. So it's the best of times from that point of view. It's easier now for everyone to see just what the authorities are prepared to do and how ruthless they are and how much misery and death they're prepared to cause to get control of the people. So it's the best of times from that point of view. Is more people should be able to see this and can then just refuse to participate in it. And I'm not talking about, I'm not advocating sort of violent reactions to them. It's more the sort of Gandhi way, really, of sort of civil disobedience. It's just not to carry out their stupid rules, They try to make out a lot of this stuff like social distancing and wearing masks, that these are laws, but they're not laws. They're certainly not in the UK. They try to kid you into thinking they are, but they're actually unenforceable because they're just they're guidelines, really, from the government. So people are quite within their rights to say, well, it's just a nonsense and I'm not prepared to put up with it. And if enough people do that, their whole thing collapses. It's only because of the way people are cooperating with these guidelines that the governments are putting out, thinking that they're laws that they have to obey, which they're not. If people realise this, then it's the best of times. They can see through this charade that the governments of the world have done. So they're all complicit in this, and the media, and the medical establishment. All of these three groups, there are people in these groups who know very well that this is all based on fallacies. It's all based on lies. It's not based on science. It's not based on looking after people. It's not based on healthcare. It's easier now to see through all of this, and so that people can reject what their governments are doing, and bring around a new way, look for a new way of living, look for a new way of cooperation between peoples, which doesn't rely on these corrupted systems. The whole governmental systems around the world is, as I often say, rotten to the core. And when something's rotten to the core, there's nothing you can do with it. You can't repair it. So you have to get rid of it in the right way, of course, and bring in something new. So it's a great opportunity now for people to realise this, see through this charade and reject it and bring around something new, so that they're never fooled again. Because if they don't do something, it's already, people are seeing in the pipeline, the governments are talking about a second wave, so they're going to relax the restrictions for a little bit, and then there'll be a second wave come. People are thinking, in the autumn, as we call it here, or the fall, as you would say in the States. And sure enough, if people don't do something, there will be. And there may be actually more. We know that the figures have been falsified as regards how many people have become ill, because we know it doesn't take much to look to see that these coronavirus figures are false. The death certificates are being falsified in ways, or coronavirus death is being put on things when people have patently died of something else. So it's easy to fix them. But what will happen, and this is coming back to what I was talking about, the electromagnetic radiations from these amassing thousands of satellites, there could very well be later on in the year a rise in real illness and deaths, which they will of course attribute to a second wave of coronavirus, but will actually be brought about by the increased amount of microwave radiation that people will be enduring from these ever increasing numbers of satellites. I'm speculating slightly here, not on the fact that all these thousands of satellites are going up, because that's a fact. And knowing the damage that microwave radiation does, that's a fact too. But I suspect that if we allow them to get away with coming up with the so-called second wave of coronavirus, it'll be due, in fact, to the increased amount of electromagnetic radiation.
But to say it's also the best of times because it allows all of us to communicate with each other. We're able to talk to people all around the world. Well, not just us, but we're all communicating with each other in a way that hasn't been possible before the last, 10 years or whatever. So, this is an opportunity for people to learn and find out what's actually really going on, and to be able to then resist and push back and say, no, we're not going to wear masks, we're not going to avoid all our friends and family because
we're not going to have vaccinations.
We're not going to have vaccinations because we know there's no virus, there's no illness. So, it is the best of times, but we're, on a sort of fairly short window to get this information out as quickly as possible before these other ideas could take over. We don't want to be we're not pessimists. We are very much optimists. We are very much hopeful that, and this is borne out by the increasing numbers of people who who clearly are aware of what's going on, and so we're all helping to spread the information to let people be informed so that they can actually make. We're not telling people what to do. The objective of our work is to give people the information so that they can make informed decisions, but truly informed decisions, not just decisions based on what they're being fed by the media, which is, as we've said before, well, basically it's nonsense. Well, it's just untrue. So, it is this mix of best of times, worst of times, but we like to see it as an opportunity to help people become informed.
Best apocalypse ever, to quote our buddy James True, and it has definitely been a time of revelation if there has ever been one. Thank you guys so much for being part of it and getting this information out here. During the break, we were talking about some of the history and some of the falsehoods and lies and fear porn that has historically been heaped upon us. Our buddy Daz mentioned the blankets that were given to the Indians. You were talking about the Black Plague. Touch on some of that. We have about, I guess, a little bit less than a quarter hour left.
Okay, well, yeah, the two very interesting points, and we did look at these. Well, I'll take the, because it's quite a popular one, particularly in the States, about the diseased blankets being given to the Indians to cause smallpox. Well, I'm going to link it to the conquistadors moving into South America, because although there's a time difference between that and North America, really the factors involved in it are the same. In both cases, obviously the Spanish conquistadors moved into South America, and it's largely the British into North America. But in all cases, they pushed the indigenous people off their land, which they farmed and lived on healthily. And it was just a land grab and a resource grab. I'm really making this as short as possible. A resource grab and a land grab. And whenever you push people off, the ones that they didn't kill or massacre, because they're the superior armaments of the British moving into North America and the conquistadors moving into South America, they had superior armor and weaponry, and either massacred the people, drove them off the land. They enslaved many of them in South America because they were after the gold and silver and resources. It was even so bad there in South America that the people they enslaved to work in the mines, they didn't bother to feed because they thought, well, once they die, we just chuck them away and we get some more. There's plenty of people here. It was as callous as that. They had armored dogs, which they were trained to track people down and literally rip them to pieces. It was quite a dreadful situation. There's quite a good history of most of it by Dr. David Stannard, which has written a history of what happened. He doesn't quite get the blankets bit right, which I'll come on to, but he tells in graphic detail just to what the true history of the invasion of South America was. And whenever you get people driven off their land so that they can no longer farm properly, they can't feed themselves properly, they don't have clean water, then they become malnourished and they die. It's as simple as that. And it's nothing to do with that they caught a disease. They just die of starvation. And the body, when the body's deprived of its nutrients, all sorts of toxicity comes out of the body in boils and lesions, and the body just disintegrates from internally. So that's a short thing of what happened in South America, and really the same thing happened in North America as the indigenous people were pushed off their land. They become ill. They're no longer onto fertile land. They couldn't grow their crops, and they started to become ill. The toxins of the body comes out, and the blisters. When you start to get blisters and lesions and rashes on the body, it's the body trying to get rid of toxins.
Absolutely.
And it's much better to blame it onto a virus, as they often do, or bacterial attack. Much easier to do that and say, well, it's unfortunate these people came across from Europe, and the indigenous people didn't have any immunity, that word again, to the diseases that they had, and that's what killed them off. Unfortunate, but not really our fault.
The point is, it's a cover story, or rather, in brief, it's a cover story for all the atrocities that occurred, and so it's so much easier, and they've been getting away with it for centuries now, because that goes back quite a long way, doesn't it? So the other thing with the blankets is that there's a little bit of a question mark as to what actually
whether it actually really
whether it happened, but if the blankets were contaminated in some way, it would have been with some kind of noxious material, or just sort of other blood and bodily matter or whatever, that would have just been toxic to the body. Certainly nothing to do with germs. It wouldn't have been smallpox. Whether it was done intentionally or not, again, it's not exactly clear. We weren't able to really kind of dig completely deeply into that one, but it's certainly questionable. But they were not given, it was nothing to do with smallpox, that's for sure, but it would have been to do with some kind of toxic or noxious material.
That's if it happened at all. As I say, we searched the historical records, and there's nothing that really proves that event actually happened. I know it's sort of found its way into sort of folklore, as it were, but we couldn't actually find any definite documentation that said, yes, this actually happened. But having said all that, as Dawn quite rightly said, it wasn't anything to do if people became ill and came up in boils and rashes and things. It was more to do with malnutrition, basically starvation, nothing to do with any germs. So another interesting thing, because I guess we're fast running out of time here, but I think it might be interesting for people to see, because it's another one of these fallacies that's put out by history. In our history books, we're all told about the Black Death. Certainly, I think everyone knows about the Black Death. A plague that swept the world, and millions are supposed to have died, and this was all caused by infected rat fleas. That's what we were told in school anyway. So this was one of the things that we looked into. We thought, well, okay, let's have a look at this. Anyway, again, cut a very long story short, we came across some work by Professor Mike Bailey in one of the Irish universities, I think, and he did quite an interesting book called New Light on the Black Death. Now, as a profession, as well as being a university professor, one of his expertise was dendrochronology, which is the study of tree rings, which might sound a rather bizarre thing to do. But he was able to look back in time, because there's some very long-lived trees, and you can tell from examining the tree rings quite what the atmosphere was like at a particular period in history. He also examined ice cores, where you can do the same sort of thing. So they both sort of supported one another. Both the tree rings and the ice cores showed that at that period, when the Black Death was supposed to be raging across the world, the Earth's atmosphere was extremely toxic. It was something that poisoned it. There were high levels of ammonia, and this would fit more in with the eyewitness accounts, because there are lots of eyewitness testimonials of that time that talk about people just normally healthy and then just dropping down dead in the street. Talks about a noxious atmosphere, which was choking. There's talks about in rivers and lakes, just the fish all coming to the surface dead. Now, I mean, that one fact alone says, well, that can't be anything to do with infected rat fleas, they're not going to be biting fish. So, again, when we looked at this, we could see that knowing what we knew about, there was no possibility that there could be some infection,
right.
But the evidence showed that there was literally a toxic atmosphere in the world. Now, one of the other things that Professor Mike Bailey was able to see, that there was again eyewitness reports of what appears to be a comet of some sort coming into the Earth's atmosphere, and this again may have been partially due to where the toxic atmosphere was coming from. But the tree ring and the ice core rings definitely support the fact that the Earth's atmosphere at that time was extremely toxic, poisonous, so much so. And this would fit in with why people and fish were dying so quickly, and nothing to do with an infection. And the rate of spread of this, again, does not fit in with any infectious disease. You know, there's a certain incubation period for a disease before someone becomes sick enough or even dies from it. Well, none of that fits. You know, people were across the world were becoming sick too quickly, if you like, so that the disease couldn't have had time to spread from any particular place around the world. And again, archaeological evidence shows that there is not a great abundance of rat carcasses, if you like, anywhere, because the rats were supposed to die from this as well. They were infected by the fleas that then moved on to human beings. So the real evidence doesn't point to rats and infected fleas. It points to a toxic atmosphere of some sort.
And there was also an earthquake, which I was going to say, there was a major earthquake, which also would have added to the corrupted atmosphere, as it's reported, you know, the kind of foul air, and that would certainly account for people if they were breathing in something that was so poisonous that, you know, that would suffocate them, and that's why they would die quite quickly.
So it's just another example, and I know I gave a very potted version. We do talk about this in the book, but I just wanted to give it as a potted version of how a great piece of history, if you like, has been given out to most school children at the time, which is completely untrue. And again, not based on science. And there are more people now starting to admit in officialdom, shall we say, that yes, it was nothing to do with rat fleas. They haven't quite gone as far as looking at Professor Bailey's work and realising what the atmosphere was like at that time. But again, you know, Professor Bailey, that was his job, and the evidence is there for people to see. So they need to refute what the trees and the ice cores are telling us.
Yeah, I mean, even the WHO's not recognised this sort of science because they're still putting out, you know, the whole bacterial, it's a bacterial infection, you know, plague in the general terms is a bacterial infection that's spread by animal fleas. So, you know, or they now call it small animals rather than rats. So maybe they've slightly amended it, but no, they're still putting out that it's a bacterial disease spread by small animals.
They seem ever increasingly keen on showing that we humans can catch diseases from animals, you know, and there's obviously we've got in the UK, the authorities are culling badgers because they're trying to blame badgers for passing tuberculosis to cattle. Again, yeah, we've looked at this, and again, there is no scientific evidence for that. Why they should pick on badgers, you know, as being a mammal that should, you know, why not foxes or rabbits or human beings, you know, any other mammal? Why particularly are they deciding that, no, badgers are to blame, and so therefore we must kill them? And they've been killing them in the thousands, you know, beautiful animal. I mean, we have written to the authorities about this, but of course they totally ignore anything we say because they've got another agenda to play. You know, thousands of cattle have been slaughtered because of this. I mean, we had a thing in the UK a few years ago, which people might know. He got called mad cow disease. And we investigated that, you know, as I say, we looked into all sorts of things. And we found that actually, the truth of the matter was, again, not a disease as such. It was not an infection. We found what it was in actual fact, and why it was so peculiar to the UK is the UK government and the whole veterinary system insisted that farmers dip their cattle in a dip. It was purportedly to protect them from warble fly, which apparently bores holes in the skin, so it's less valuable. So the organophosphate dip that they insisted that the cows and that be dipped in was much stronger than in any other country. And organophosphates are a neurotoxin. And of course, because you're submerging your cattle in it, it was getting into the cow's bloodstream and attacking their nervous system.
It was mainly over their necks, which is why it got through to the head very quickly.
Into the spinal column. And of course, the cows apparently went mad. You know, they just couldn't control themselves, falling over and acting in most peculiar ways, and were eventually slaughtered. But, you know, this was, again, something, not a disease that we're catching. It was brought about purely by the ridiculous nature of the veterinary system and the government systems in basically poisoning the cows. But of course, they wouldn't admit to that, even though certain farmers did look into it, and we follow some of their work. And again, we this is all put in our book so people can read the details of it. But again, it's just another false claim by governmental agencies.
David, why don't you remind everybody where they can get that book too? We only got about 20 seconds left. Unbelievable.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
So why don't you remind everybody where they can get that book? We've only got about 20 seconds before the end of the show hits.
Well, any Amazon outlet, if you go onto any of the Amazon sites, you'll see the book, What Really Makes You Ill, Why Everything You Thought You Knew About Disease Is Wrong. And it's got a picture on the front of Rodin's The Thinker.
Absolutely great.
And so it's unmistakable. And obviously we recommend that people read it.
Don Lester, David Parker, thank you guys so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Lovely to be with you.